So we move from the fifth line personality and this pure transpersonal field, and we move into the sixth line. Remember that whenever we're dealing with the sixth line, we're not really dealing with the essentials of the hexagram itself. That the sixth line has a natural process in which it is to become the authority of whatever that hexagram happens to be. In other words, to be able to dive into it in the first Saturn cycle of 28.6 years, then to climb up onto the roof of the house and be an observer, a detached, objective observer of the phenomena around it, and then finally at its Chiron point to enter back into the process, enter into the world as a living example. This business of coming off the roof, it is easier for 6-3s than 6-2s because 6-3s never stay on the roof very long. We'll talk about that. But the 6-2 is the classic representation of this process of diving deeply into life, going up on the roof, and then having to come down. In dealing with the sixth line personality, for the first time what we're looking at, we've already seen the 6 twice. We have seen the 3-6 and the 4-6. And so here in its final stage, we get it at the personality level. Now you've already seen that in the harmonics of changing crosses, that there is repetition. In other words, that the 5-2 and the 2-5. And so you have similar themes, but please understand something. The personality dominates, always. Just as it dominates in your own design. We have conscious access to the personality. We do not have access to the unconscious. And though the 3-6 and the 4-6 have to live out the sixth line theme, they live it out in a sense as victims of it. Remember their potential to feel like martyrs, because it's coming from their unconscious. However, the sixth line personality is very different. After all, it is right there. It is consciously involved with what it is to be a 6. In the first Saturn cycle, the personality 6 really is chaotic. It can suffer a great deal. And it suffers, and at the same time, because it's a third line personality in that sense, it's constantly having things bump into it. All kinds of things bumping into it. Underneath, you have the second line hermit. So here we're dealing with the role model hermit, but in the early stage we're not. We're dealing with the anarchist hermit. So what happens to them is they go out, they're pulled into a situation. That situation obviously is not a role model, does not work. They become anarchistic, they break it down, and they go and become a hermit. They run away. But they can't stay away. They can't stay away because that third line keeps on pulling people into them, and their second line unconscious is always drawing the projection of others. So they're in a helpless situation in that first Saturn cycle. They're constantly going in and out of things, always trying to find the right place of retreat. So one of the things that you'll see about 6-2s in the early part of their life is that they're constantly being driven to look for their retreat. And of course they don't get it until they get out of the Saturn phase and they climb up onto the roof of the house. Then they get that retreat that they so look for. You know, leave me alone. All of this is trial and error. It's only made me pessimistic about life. I don't really want to have anything to do with this anymore. Let me find my place of retreat. I've talked about that it's not necessarily easy to come down off of the roof. Well, it isn't necessarily easy to get up either. That's something else to keep in mind. The chaos can really suck you in, and you can be trying to claw your way up onto the roof with all kinds of forces dragging you back down. And that's a phenomena that the 6-2 and the 6-3 know really well. Leave me alone, I'm trying to get up onto the roof. No, you can't now. I need you now. I need you to answer this question. There is tremendous pressure on the 6th line to be the example. After all, it's pressure on them to be the example of the hexagram. I mean, that's what they're here to be. They're here to say, this is what we are, and this is the way it works, and everything's terrific. It's perfect. It's fabulous. It's great. And of course, in the first 30 years, they learn that it's not true. Remember that the gift of the third line, and the gift of the third line theme in the 6, is to find out what doesn't work and let go of it. And once you've recognized what doesn't work and you let go of it, you can have a transpersonal potential to pay off your karma to those people who are coming to you for your objective advice. I mean, that is, after all, the whole key to the 6-2 life, is that it needs to have the right experiential field early in its life in order to be able to develop a clear objectivity later. Again, that comes back to having 6 children. You know, the 6th child makes its parents nervous because it does bizarre things. You know, they have this whole thing about their child is going to be the little role model. And their little role model ends up doing things that are not little role model-ish. And then they end up getting into a lot of trouble because of that. And of course, every time they get into trouble, that unconscious of theirs says, where is the place that I can get away? Where is the place that I can find that they will leave me alone? The projected attitude. You know, the 6th line is an administrator. And the thing to recognize about the administrator is that this is the democratic unconscious underneath. Now, what that's really saying is, in the first phase of the life in the first Saturn cycle, it's that it's saying, I don't want to administrate anything. Nothing works. You do it. Leave me alone. Don't come to me and ask me, I don't know. Leave me alone. Remember the dilemma of all second lines. They're naturals. It doesn't mean they know how or why they do what they do. And they're always under pressure when anybody has an expectation, because they don't really know if they can fulfill that expectation, because since they don't know how they do it, they don't know if it's always going to be there. Now remember, we've seen that the 6th line has a deep theme in it, and it's all about trust. When they begin to trust in their natural ability, then they don't have to be uncomfortable with the fact that they don't know why it works. They can just trust in it. And out of that, they can be of real value to the other. What happens so often is they're put under enormous pressure, not simply to do what they do best, but to be transpersonal and tell everybody else how to do that. That's a 5th line job. That's not the 6th line job. The 6th line job is ultimately to be an objective observer, and out of their observation can come their contribution to society. It is out of what they observe objectively. The limited perspective is the optimist. Now, of course, we have this dynamic that exists in all 6 lines, that they have to go through a phase of pessimism before they can find their optimism. Now think about how valuable a piece of information that is to a young 6'2". And you say to them, look, yeah, you're going to have to go through a lot of stuff. But by the time you get to the end of your 20s, it'll straighten itself out. Just enter into those experiences aware. Know what you're getting into. That's all. Be yourself. A little bit of advice goes a long way when it's accurate. And it's so important for the 6'2". It has to go through the pessimism. It has to see that things don't work. Otherwise, it can't become a capable objective force, and it ultimately cannot find what it needs to be an example of, which is itself. You see, it's a joke. The not-self does not work properly. It just doesn't. And as long as a 6 is living out the not-self, nothing works properly. Period. So there's no trust. And as long as there's no trust, there's no essential value to the other, and there's no real example. And the moment that they grasp that they can trust themselves, that they can trust their gift, they can trust what it is just to be them, that they don't have to be concerned about the crossed T's and the dotted I's. They have enormous influence. They are the ones, after all, that sit on the hill, and that we all have to go to at some point or another to get the damn blessing. Otherwise it isn't going to work. We need their legitimate, objective appraisal. That optimism, the optimism of a 6'2", can never be fulfilled until they get off the roof. But it is the optimism that keeps them alert while they're on the roof. Because they're looking. It drives them. They're looking to see what possibly does work out there, and what could work for them. This assumption about the 6, be careful in this aloofness not to assume that nothing can impact on them during that time of aloofness. It's not true. They're waiting to find something that works. Now, what will happen is that they may be excited about it or whatever, but to really be able to deeply involve themselves in whatever they see that works, ultimately that only comes when they come off of the roof. But they're looking for things that work. And the moment they see what works, while they're in that interregnum between the Saturn and the Chiron, that's when they can have their greatest influence on society. Because that's the point at which they can say, look, I know all these things that don't work, but this thing here, it really works. Now, I have this wonderful relationship in the genetic code with 6'2". I have many 6'2" in my life in terms of human design. I'm a 5'1", so I have these 6'2" in my life. And they have had enormous impact on the popularity of human design. Every time that I have had contact with a 6'2", and they've been introduced to human design, they have brought all kinds of people, additional people, into this knowledge. That's their gift, after all. Once they recognize something that truly works, they have this tremendous power to be an objective influence and to be able to impact on many. So when they look at human design, the 6'2" that I've met, that's like the villager coming up and asking if they should build the ark. They say, yes, this is okay, this is all right, do this. So they're deeply influential in a different way. You see, the 5'1" is a transpersonal force. It's going to let everybody know that it's there. But it doesn't mean that it gets everybody involved. It's a pure projection field. Some people will think it's the best thing since sliced bread, and other people are going to think it's a waste of time. But the 6'2" can take anybody off the fence. Either way, by the way. That's their job. That's what they're here for. But by the time they get to that point at the Chiron where they have to enter in, that's the time they have to live their design. It's not about being able to say everybody else is, that's great, that's wonderful, do this, do that. It's about them being a living example of it. There's nothing more impressive. I've heard wonderful stories from people who have met people who are into living out their design. And there's something, it's so funny that people find it unusual to meet somebody who's being themselves. I mean, it's really something that's funny, and it has a real impact on other people. There's nothing more impressive than a 6'2" that's living out their design. Nothing. Because after all, there are examples, and they're really saying to us, here, this is an example of how you can really be yourself in life. They're very powerful forces in that way. Their aspire to role is to be objective. And of course, that is essential for them. And yet at the same time, it's important to see that objectivity in their first cycle of Saturn, it's about sustainment. See, they're meant to go through all that trial and error at the beginning of their life, but they're also got the power to stay with it. They have this martyr feeling. And as martyrs, they're really good. 6s are better martyrs than 3s. Please understand that. Because in the 6, the martyr stuff goes away. They get to 28 or 29, and they jump out of their martyr stage. Whereas the 3 can get stuck with it all of its life, as long as it doesn't really get to the basis of things. So what you have here is the aspire to role in the first part of the process. It's going to be the sustainment. It's out of the sustainment that you actually get to the objectivity. In other words, as long as they can sustain themselves through that first cycle, no nervous breakdown, locked up in an asylum, because that can happen to them. Okay, they can be really chaotic. They are sustained in that. And being sustained in that, then they can make their way through, because that sustainment gives them their objectivity. They get to see the full spectrum of the experience. And because they've been sustained through it, sustainment is a magical thing. You see, only when you can sustain can you ultimately become wise. All third lines have this potential in their life to become wise through sustainment. As long as they stay with it, they stay with their life process. If they stay with their nature, they will come to recognize the beauty that lies within themselves, and they will get to see real wisdom within themselves about the nature of their lives. So this sustainment is a very powerful force. It leads to that objectivity. Underneath, you have harmony. Objectivity is the only thing that brings harmony into the 6's life. And they only begin to meet harmony when they get up on the roof. They get up on the roof and others seek them out. And when somebody is seeking you out, there is the potential, because they want something from you, that you suddenly have a very different relationship with the world around you. And that the harmony is absolutely essential. The 6'2", when it crawls up to the roof of the house, is looking for a place of harmony where it can be left alone, where it can find its objective peace. It's essential for it. And so they retreat. And they retreat, and in that retreat, they find the necessary harmony for their lives. They don't have that harmony in that first cycle. And it is one of the things that is most frightening to them when they have to come down off of the roof. Because the world is an unharmonious place. If we would give everybody an instrument and have them all play, which is our lives, we would recognize the incredible cacophony out there. This is not the symphony that it is intended to be. It's a lot of very chaotic music. and everything about us. We are a frequency. We are vibrating. We are all music. We are parts of the great so-called music of the spheres. We're alive in the dance here. And it's essential to recognize that this harmony, that the real fear is that when they come back down, they have to step into this unharmonious cacophony, and they have to be able to hold their own tune. Have you ever tried to sing with other people, and you have to sing in harmony with them, and you got to hold your own tune, and their tune is always pulling you away from your part of the harmony? I mean, this is something really to grasp about the sixth experience. And when they come off the roof, they've got to sing their own tune. And they can't be bothered by the cacophony around them. By the way, one of the ways that you see that mechanically in life is that, people walking around with Sony headphones on, going through the cacophony of life, and they got their tune playing in their head. Because the only way that they can successfully get off of the roof is if they're able to hold their tune despite the fact that other people may not be harmonious with them. Because they can't afford to be pointing out to everybody at that point, hey, you're out of tune. It isn't going to work anymore. They're not on the roof. Nobody's looking up and saying, can you correct my notes? It's not happening. They're down in the world living out their own tune, and what they will discover is if they keep to their tune, they will meet those that can harmonize with them. And they will see that they don't have to be disturbed by what was once in the first cycle of their life so disturbing that nothing worked. You see, it's about them being perfect. It's not about anybody else being perfect. It is the ultimate selfish perfectness. They've had their service time. They sat up there on the roof and gave everybody the piece of flesh that they demanded, just to be left alone and to get their reward as an authority. But when they step down into the world, they sing their own tune for themselves. And when they find harmony, terrific. But if they don't find harmony, no pain. No pain. It's not necessary. They can keep to their own tune. They don't get lost in the cacophony. The bonding strategy. This is a complex bonding strategy. After all, we know that the 6-2 plays out a 3-2 game in its first Saturn cycle. So we know that there's all kinds of bonds that are made and broken. All kinds of difficulty in being able to maintain relationships. And because of the transpersonal nature of this cross, and because of the third line theme, you're going to have all kinds of people bumping into them, bringing them into the potential of relationship. On the other side of that, the sexuality is shyness. And of course, in that sexuality of shyness, remember that the genetic strategy of the second line is that it must meet boldness in order for it to have the right kind of partner. And one of the things that you can see is that the 6-2, in the first stage of its life, it can be open to such things as rape and many other violations. Psychic violations, physical violations. After all, they are demanding that they have to be penetrated. You cannot just engage with them. That they have a barrier that needs to be overcome. Now, when you add to that barrier the chaos of the third line, of the bonds made and broken, you have to see that there are many situations in which they can really be overwhelmed by forces. And we can be raped in many ways. I don't just mean that sexually. These are people that can have somebody, dump 7,000 mics of acid down their throat just to see them explode. They can have all kinds of things happen to them in their process when they're in that early stage. It can be devastating for them. it's very important that the 6-2 understands this early period of chaos. Because after all, if they enter into things correctly, according to their type, according to their authority, then they're not going to have those kinds of experiences, because they're going to have a basic protection within their mechanics. That's why we need to educate young people, and we need to let them know. And it's not like the 6-2 stands alone in its dilemma. As you've seen, every profile, each child carrying a profile, regardless of what it is, needs to be nurtured according to that profile. And if not, they will all suffer unhealthy consequences. The unhealthy consequence, by the way, is becoming the not self. That's the unhealthiest thing in life. That's what kills us prematurely. That's what destroys us, is a life of not self, where there never is a place of inner peace, where there never is a sense of real well-being psychically in the world. So dealing with children, bringing this knowledge to children, this is an essential thing to do. The pessimism inherent in the beginning of the cycle. After all, the 6th line is a role model, and it's looking for a role model partner. It's not just about the cosmic romantic idea of what a soulmate is. It's looking for a role model partner. It's looking for a partner that is an example in themselves, that they're an example of what a partner should be, could be, might be, because that's what they're seeking out. Now, of course, they have this deep pessimism in the early part of their life, and only when they crawl up onto the roof is the optimism actually there, that it's possible. Now, what happens to most 6-2s, if they are unaware, they spend a great deal of time going into their isolation, their roof phase, with somebody. Remember, they're transpersonal. They don't go alone, but they end up putting enormous pressure on their partner to change and become the role model that they expect to have. And so a lot of pressure is created in that realm. It can lead to difficulties. The 6th line as a role model is not easily satisfied. Yet at the same time, they have been trained to see that things don't necessarily work. And they don't give up just because something doesn't work. Sustainment carries them. They don't give up. Now, of course, if you're trying to change somebody, you're their greatest enemy. After all, we are here to be ourselves. And one cannot be objective if one is trying to change the other away from their true nature. And at the moment that the 6 or anybody else is truly aware of their nature, that's the moment that they begin to discover love as a perfect form. And that's one of the bases of love, the 1057, the perfected form of love. That is being yourself intuitively, being yourself spontaneously. To be yourself spontaneously is the only healthy thing to be. There is nothing else. And this is the perfection of love in form. When you are yourself, when you're living out your type, your purpose will unfold naturally. You see, I may be giving you the other side of the knowledge so that you can understand where your vehicle is going. But you're not going to get there just by knowing it's there. It is living out the nature of your vehicle. It's living out your type and your authority, your definition, what your design is. That's what allows you to reach your purpose. So the moment that the 6-2 has that opportunity to truly understand itself, then the potential for love, for deep love, opens up inside. After all, as are examples, if they do not love those who seek them out, then what they give is never going to be clear, and it's never going to be objective. The security strategy. This is all about trust at the personality level. I mean, everything about the 6th line is about trust. That's why they're so terrific in combination with the 5. You see, if the 5 delivers something that's practical, the 6 automatically will resonate to that. You know, they can trust something that they can practically understand. They just can. And the only way to impress a 6 is to be able to bring them something that they can actually trust, not something that they're unsure of. That's why they're such good authorities. If you bring them something that is uncertain, they will know instantly that it is uncertain. And they will let you know that it is uncertain. That's their job. They have to be able to trust it. And if they trust it, then they can be a real authority in their objectivity. So trust for them is essential. These are the children of the man from Missouri. You know? Show me. Show me, show me, show me, show me, show me. You know? These are the little kids that play show and tell. Let's play doctor, show me. It's all show me. And of course, if you can show them and it works, then you've got them on your side. It's always nice to have a 6 on your side. They're really good. They can fix your reputation if you're a 5. They can. They're reputation fixers. You know, everybody's saying, oh, that 5, they're terrible, and the 6 says, no, they're not. They're really nice. They have deep impact on the community that way. But they can't say that just to say that. They have to be able to trust in their own recommendation. That's the whole thing. And if you can't get to them at that level, if they don't trust, they're never going to back you up. It's just not going to be there. Remember that the whole nature of trust is rooted in the beginnings of bonds made and broken. And it's one of the things to understand about 6s is that once they get past Saturn, they can really make money. But everything before that is useless. I mean, it's not that they can't get jobs or things. They don't last. They don't have any real authority. They're very pessimistic about what they're involved with. They don't really get their chance to do well materially. And of course, if they're not nurtured properly, and they don't understand that they don't understand that their career arc begins when they get on the roof. It doesn't begin earlier. Once they get up on the roof, that's where their career really starts. That's the moment that out of their objectivity and sitting up there on the roof, they begin to get positive attention and they begin to take advantage of it. That's why, again, how difficult it is to come down off of the roof once it's proved to be so successful for you. You know, it's a nice place to be after all. You don't really have to be involved. And the whole thing about that is that it's a misconception because it's based on the memory, and that the early memory is pessimistic memory. It's based on that memory that says, geez, but if I go back down there, it's a toilet. I'm happy up here. I don't want to go down there. I struggled down there. I couldn't keep a job down there. Up here on the roof, they pay me. And of course, it's simply because they keep on going back. And they go back to that place in their memory. And of course, if they understand that they're supposed to go through that phase, that they're supposed to see all those things that don't work because that's what's going to help them get rich. I mean, you know, it's so obvious and it's so beautiful. If you know that things don't work, what a gift that is. Instead of being depressed, it's about understanding what a contribution that is. I mean, you got to have these people. They're the ones that figure it all out. 3s are great. Right? David's my computer 3. You know, he knows how to fix it. I don't know how to fix it. I ain't no 3. It's not part of my trial and error. 3s know how to fix things because they know what doesn't work. And they can recognize what doesn't work. And out of that comes that ability, comes that capacity to be able to make things work and that everybody thinks, wow, they're great. It's the way it works. So when that 6 is nurtured correctly and they see, look, every time something doesn't work, instead of thinking something terrible has happened to you, have a celebration. I learned something new today. This doesn't work. Isn't that great? You can come home and say, you know, I found out something else that didn't work today. Wow. You know, we don't think that way. And then all the 3s and the 6s suffer from that lousy propaganda. What do you mean you found out something doesn't work? Why don't you find out something that does? You know, that's not their job then. Their job is to find out all those things that don't work, and that includes relationships, and that includes jobs. So that trust or not, their career opportunities come when they get up on the roof, because when they get up on the roof, they realize something. They've actually learned from all that experience. I mean, they get it. They're not fools. You know, they get it. They suddenly see, this person wants to know this from me, and I've been there, I can tell them. I mean, they slowly get it. They slowly get it that they have authority because they've been through experience. And then they slowly can begin to respect themselves and that period of their life. Now, if we nurture our children properly who carry this kind of profile, that isn't going to be a difficulty for them. You know, they're going to see that it's party time until they're 28. And then the party's over. You know, and then they can organize parties for others. You know, that's it. And they can go that way and not feel like they're carrying some enormous burden. Because they're not. And they don't have to carry this horrible pessimism inside of them that says that everything is terrible because it doesn't work. Which is really a joke for these people. Because that's their gift. As long as they're not on the roof, they're always depleting resources. It's one of those things to understand about their turmoil. In other words, that as a security strategy, they can get very depressed by seeing that they don't seem to be able to make ends meet. You know, there is traditionally a lot of indebtedness in this. You know, these are the kinds of people that run around for the first 28 years and then pay off the debts for the next 20 while they're up on the roof. Now, of course, that's okay if they know that that's all right. In other words, if they know that it's going to be expensive to be chaotic and they may not be able to cover it themselves, not to feel burdened, because when they get up on the roof, they'll make it all back and they'll be able to make good on that. After all, when they get on the roof, you can trust them. You know, that's the joke with a 6-2. Don't lend them money when they're under 30. You know? Because you're going to have to wait a long... they'll give it back, but you're going to have to wait until they're up on that roof. Okay. When they get on the roof, when they begin to trust in themselves, that's when they become great nourishers. They have this tremendous potential to be able to nourish. And what they nourish is the transpersonal. In other words, the gift of being able to say that this one or this thing or that thing is really correct and it's good for you, but that thing over there doesn't work, so don't bother. This is how they nourish, and they nourish in a very broad field. After all, a transpersonal cross. They can have a deep and lasting impact on all kinds of people once they're up there on that roof. And again, there is the seduction in their whole life. You know, the roof is such a comfortable place to be. It's such a nice place to be. It's cozy. You got it all set up. You know, you don't have to scramble. You don't have to worry. All those things are coming to you naturally. You can begin to see yourself as a real role model. You know, and then the axe falls. And it's like, well, you know, do I really have to? You know, I mean, is there anybody that's watching? Do I have to? Yes. There is no choice. Yes. Tough. Remember something. as I tease and joke about the six-line experience, to recognize that in the genetic continuity of life, they are our examples. It is important for us that the 6-2s, that the 6-3s are clear and clean beings, because they do establish that example in the world. And it's for this reason that they have to go through these sequences that are so different. They have a different role to play in the continuity of things.